My name is Sadie, 33 years old, living in Charleston, South Carolina. My wedding took place in a garden draped in white flowers, surrounded by the sound of string instruments and warm congratulations. But the very next morning, just as I stepped out of the honeymoon suite, my mother-in-law, Joan, slapped me in front of all the bridesmaids and coldly said, "You belong to our family now. Sign this." I didn't cry. I simply turned back to the room and opened the safe. It was empty. But not because I was careless. It was because I had started the counterattack long before they realized they were in a game. Have you ever been in a relationship where the person beside you never really saw who you were? If you've ever been used simply because you stayed silent, leave a comment. Tap like if you believe silence can be a weapon. And don't forget to subscribe, because the story I'm about to tell, you won't be able to stop listening to. I wasn't born into a family like the Hamptons, where every photo frame is polished and each crystal glass costs more than a regular person's monthly paycheck. I grew up in an old orphanage south of Savannah, where dinner sometimes was just white bread dipped in condensed milk and where sleep came with the sound of wind howling through rotted window frames. I met Mr. Robert Whitlock on an August afternoon when I was 12. He came to the orphanage as a donor. Silver hair, deep eyes, a slow but commanding walk. Unlike the usual charity visitors who handed out gifts and left, he sat beside me in the garden corner while I was trying to fix an old music player. He didn't say a word, just handed me a small screw that fit perfectly where I'd been struggling. I remember looking up at him, both confused and guarded. He simply nodded and said, "You were listening to the machine. That's something adults forget to do." 3 months later, I was adopted. The paperwork was signed quickly, smoothly, not at all the bureaucratic mess people always talk about. He never married, had no biological children. I was the only one living with him in a 2-story wooden house behind the Charleston marshes. At first, I lived quietly, not daring to believe it was real. But he never pressured me to talk. He never expected me to become anyone else. He just let me observe. He was once a Marine, then became an investment advisor in the healthcare sector. But none of what he owned was listed under his name directly. I only knew he often came home late with a locked briefcase, and when I asked what he did, he simply said, "I protect what no one realizes is valuable until it's gone." I learned everything from him: how to read contracts between the lines, how to test the truth of a promise, how to listen to what's not being said. When I turned 18, he brought me to the headquarters of a company called Haven Holdings, a name nobody knew, but one that backed over 40 healthcare investments across the southern United States. In a small meeting room that smelled of old wood and dim yellow light, he had me sign a financial guardianship document, not as an adopted daughter but as a strategic heir. I didn't fully understand at the time. I just remember his gaze, calm, unwavering, full of resolve. He said, "People will underestimate you because you don't speak up, because you don't fight. But if you know how to listen, if you know how to wait, everything you need will come at the right time. Never let anyone mistake your silence for weakness. Let it become your strongest tool." When he passed, I was 24. The funeral was simple. No one from the Hampton family came. At that time, I was still just an unknown girl with no status. What they didn't know was that right after the funeral, I was invited to a small law office in Columbia. There I received a folder, clean, minimal, with one handwritten note from him: "No need for recognition. Just be ready." Inside was a network of subsidiaries, scattered shares, and trusts, all hidden beneath layers of legal shielding. But what kept me silent the entire afternoon was a compact red-stamped document. Haven Holdings was the second largest investor in Hampton Health, the private hospital network named after the family I would later marry into. And per a clause signed 15 years prior, if the Hamptons failed to meet investment expectations for 3 consecutive quarters, voting rights would temporarily transfer to a backup stakeholder. That stakeholder was me. When I left the law office, a light rain was falling. I didn't have an umbrella, but I didn't rush. Inside, I wasn't overjoyed nor anxious. Just a quiet sense that everything was slowly falling back into place. I stayed silent. No one knew I owned the most critical piece of their healthcare empire. Not Joanne. Not Liam. Not even their attorneys. And I had no intention of saying anything, unless they tried to take what wasn't theirs. I kept my day job, working as a data analyst at a small health tech firm. I lived modestly, spent carefully. I turned down all investment offers. No flashy cars, no expensive watches. But I still attended board meetings at Haven Holdings. I still quietly reviewed the Hampton Hospital reports. And when I saw they were cutting your budgets to build a luxury spa wing in the VIP section, I lightly marked a line in my notebook. They've started wasting what's not theirs. I never expected to get married so soon. And I certainly didn't expect the man who once whispered to me, "I love the quiet in you," to be planning a scheme to hand over everything my guardian left me, to his family. I didn't say anything. But I was prepared. I was ready. Because my guardian taught me this. The silent one isn't blind. She's just waiting for the moment when everything becomes clear. I met Liam Hampton in Chicago, at a mid-size healthcare investment conference where biotech companies pitched ideas to attract funding. I didn't plan to talk to anyone outside my advisory team, but Liam sat beside me during a panel on AI applications in cardiology. He had no laptop, took no notes, just observed and nodded when something intrigued him. When I turned toward him after one of his bold questions, he smiled. A smile polite enough to avoid suspicion, yet comfortable enough to draw others into his orbit. Liam had the effortless confidence of someone raised to believe the world was made for them. I'd seen many like him in boardrooms, fluent, bold, always speaking as if the room was eager to hear them. But what kept me from brushing him off wasn't how he looked at me, it was how he listened. At least in the beginning. We had dinner together on the second night of the conference. A small Italian restaurant, unpretentious but private. He asked what I did but didn't press. I gave a half-playful, half-truth answer. I worked with medical data, extracting the unseen from the overlooked. He chuckled. So you not only hear what people say but also see what they try to hide. I shrugged. If they leave enough clues, you don't even have to look. After that trip, Liam showed up more often. He came to Charleston 3 times in 2 months, always reaching out first, never playing games. I'm not the type to fall for fleeting romance, but I won't deny the feeling when a man stands on your porch during an April rain, holding a coffee and looking at you with genuine admiration. He asked if I believed in coincidences. I answered, I believe in preparation. We dated for nearly 8 months before he proposed. One early winter evening in my cozy living room he knelt, not with a diamond ring, but a small box containing a vintage ring passed down from his grandmother. I don't have much to offer besides my family and my trust, he said, but if you say yes, I'll place both in your hands. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him for a long moment and smiled. I'd learned that the people best at saying the right thing at the right time were often the ones hiding the most. The very next day, I contacted my legal team in Charleston and requested a prenuptial agreement. I gave full negotiating authority to a team of 3 attorneys, leaving nothing unguarded. Everything I owned, even assets not yet disclosed, was protected through a complex legal structure known only to me and my advisory circle. 3 weeks before the wedding, while sitting at a cafe in downtown Austin with an old friend, a lawyer specializing in high-asset divorces, I casually mentioned the Hampton name. She froze for a second, then leaned in. Joanne Hampton? She used to be married to Charles Raines. Big scandal. His ex-wife lost everything within 6 months of their divorce. I said nothing, slowly sipping my coffee. When I got back to my hotel, I contacted a marital asset investigator. A woman named Celine, discreet and precise. I gave her Joanne's information and asked for a full sweep of public records, lawsuits, asset transfers, and even unusual name changes. A week later, Celine sent me her first report. 2 names stood out: Samantha Pierce and Eva Linwood. Both had previously been married to Joanne's sons before Liam. Both lost access to their personal assets after marriage. One now lives in another state. The other once filed a lawsuit but withdrew it for unclear reasons. Their financial data post-marriage appeared to have been wiped from public records. Celine didn't draw any conclusions, but I understood perfectly. These women hadn't disappeared. They'd been broken, through a carefully engineered legal mechanism. Coercion, transfer of ownership, and then erasure from property records until they officially owned nothing. I closed my laptop and sat still in the dark for a long while. Outside, soft yellow streetlights lit the clean sidewalk of the upscale neighborhood. I listened to the faint rumble of wheels over the brick pavement, then walked to the wooden cabinet by the bed. I opened the drawer, pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement, and read every single line again. I didn't change my decision to marry. But I did change how I would step into that marriage. Not with white silk and romantic vows, but with ink and paper, with barriers, with language sharp as velvet-wrapped blades. Because from that moment I understood. This wasn't a love story. This was a game. And if they thought I was just a gentle pawn on their chessboard, they had completely misjudged who they were dealing with. The morning after the wedding, just as I changed out of my nightgown and stepped onto the red velvet carpeted stairs toward the dining room, Joanne was already seated at the head of the table, her teacup still steaming. No good morning. No warm smile like during the wedding preparations. Just a direct gaze and an ivory envelope laid neatly in front of her, its seal already delicately broken. Just a simple document, she said, her voice light as if offering me a cookie. A small adjustment so you're officially part of the family's financial structure. Purely procedural. Your lawyer can look at it later. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her, not rushing to open the envelope. My mind was replaying the quiet investigation into two women who once carried the Hampton name, only to disappear from all ownership records a few months after their weddings. I looked straight at her without blinking. I'll have my personal attorney review it. Just a necessary step, I said calmly. A short silence followed. Not long. But just enough for me to notice the corner of her mouth twitch slightly. She kept smiling. That kind of smile I've seen on people who are used to being obeyed, not challenged. Of course, the laws around here can be a bit tedious. But don't worry, I just want everything settled before you two head off on your first trip. She left the table before I had a chance to stand. Her back straight, footsteps silent over the marble floor, leaving behind an air that suddenly felt much heavier. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, already feeling a chill settle inside me. That afternoon, just as I returned to the apartment in downtown Charleston where we planned to live for a few months before moving into the Hampton estate, my phone buzzed. A message from the bank. Your joint account has recorded a transaction of $24,000 to Civic Advisory Group, LLC. I don't remember whether I exhaled or held my breath at that moment. I just remember my hand freezing midair, while the fading afternoon light streamed through the curtains, soft gold that made everything in the room look coated in a layer of artificial calm. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank system. The transaction had been processed at 1:42 p.m., while I was in the car returning from Joanne's house. The user who authorized it was Liam, confirmed by an OTP sent to his phone number. I clicked on the recipient name, Civic Advisory Group. An innocuous-sounding name. Their website was bare with just a few vague lines about strategic family asset transfer consulting. No specific address, no team list. Just one contact email and a registered EIN in Texas. I switched over to the business lookup portal. A few clicks later, the information appeared. Civic Advisory Group, LLC. Established less than 3 months ago. Its address matched a vacant office previously owned by the Hampton family. Listed legal representative, Joanne M. Hampton. Co-signer on the registration, Liam J. Hampton. I stepped away from the laptop and walked to the window. The streetlights had begun to glow. Down on the sidewalk, couples walked silently past one another, newlyweds still carrying the scent of wedding cake and hollow promises. Joanne's words from that morning echoed in my head, part of the family's financial structure. I picked up my phone and dialed Liam. He answered on the second ring, cheerful like nothing had happened. Hey babe, you back already? Everything okay? Did you transfer $24,000 to Civic Advisory? On the other end, a very brief pause. But enough for me to hear him swallow hard. Oh, yeah, it was just a setup fee. Mom wanted to restart one of her old advisory firms. I thought it was fine to use the joint account. We're married now, right? We agreed not to touch the joint account without both signatures, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. Sadie, you're making a big deal out of this. It's just a minor formality. Don't you trust me? I didn't answer right away. I clearly heard a sound behind him, like a drawer opening or someone softly clearing their throat. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly. I believe every small detail exists for a reason. Even the word you just used, set up. What do you mean? I mean, I've seen the Civic Advisory registration. And I've seen your name on it. Silence. Longer than before. Finally he sighed. I just thought, If we consolidated everything into one structure, it'd be easier to manage. Mom just wants to help you. Do you know how much she trusts you? I stared at my own reflection in the window. A long, faint shadow, but still me. The one person who knew exactly what they didn't know I knew. Next time, I said slowly, if your mother truly wants to help, tell her to start with transparency. I ended the call before he could respond. In the dimming room, I returned to my desk, opened the laptop, and began downloading all joint account transactions from the past 3 months. I also created a new folder, Civic Advisory, Monitor. I hadn't touched the documents Joanne handed me that morning, but I already knew they didn't just contain a few lines of procedural transfers. And I also knew I wouldn't be the one signing them. I started calling it the Haven Plan, not because I wanted it to sound like a mission, but because I needed a name quiet enough that no one would notice it in my schedule. Haven Sanctuary. A word that seems soft, but in the world I was stepping into, only those who understood how sharp that softness could be would survive. Everything began with an email to the legal team in Wilmington, Delaware, where I had established Haven Core 3 years ago, shortly after my grandfather passed away. The parent company, even on tax records, was listed with only 2 lines: Nonprofit Medical Advisory Organization. That was the outer shell. The core was where I stored every contract, every account, every voting right my grandfather left, under anonymous trust structures. From Charleston, I issued the order to transfer all my personal assets there: real estate, stocks, intellectual property rights. Transferred decisively, leaving no copies behind. Next came the harder step: removing Liam's name from all authorizations. It required absolute patience. Most banks assume a newlywed husband should co-manage accounts, and I had signed a few forms pre-wedding to keep appearances clean. But thanks to a clause in the prenup, a clause I had insisted on adding with explicit wording, neither party shall inherit or assume representation of the other's assets without repeat written confirmation, I had solid grounds to request Liam's removal. Each bank, each financial institution I contacted, I spoke to with calm clarity. Not a single confrontational word. I didn't want to leave echoes. I just wanted them to process the request. 3 days later, Liam asked me why our joint credit card had been declined at checkout. I smiled and said it might have been a system error. He nodded, didn't ask any further. The fact that he didn't follow up told me everything. I knew he still thought he was in control. During that time, I hired someone to install a new security system. The technician, Blake, a local young man, worked quickly, wasn't nosy, and seemed used to getting paid extra to not ask questions. I told him I wanted indoor surveillance cameras because sometimes I forget where I left my keys. He nodded and installed 2 discrete devices in the corners of the study and living room, and another inside the night lamp in the guest bedroom, the place I knew Liam made private calls each night. All feeds were routed to an encrypted virtual server accessible only by me. I also prepared a secondary safe hidden in the corner of a built-in closet that hadn't been used in years. Inside, I placed a fake contract set, replicas printed from an old template I once processed at Haven Holdings. They were stamped, signed with ink mimicking my handwriting, but the contents were completely false. If anyone got curious and opened that safe, they'd find what they thought was real, but it would lead them into a very different maze. One night, Liam went out to meet some old friends. I didn't go, claiming I felt tired. Once I heard his car engine disappear down the driveway, I entered his office. His computer password hadn't changed, his mother's birth date. A choice that was both naive and pathetic. I logged in, opened the folder labeled Projects, and there it was, a file named Horizon24_draft. I opened it. The document was nearly 20 pages long. A breakdown of premarital assets. Specific strategic targets. 3 months. Secure signatures for all shared financial linkages. 6 months. Propose asset consolidation goal. Legally absorb Haven Core. 1 year. Reassign voting control of Haven Holdings to Civic Advisory, via designated proxy. My name appeared 7 times. In the footnotes, one red underline section stood out. Avoid pressure too early, Sadie responds quietly. Must create sense of agency for effective transfer. I don't remember how I breathed in that moment. I just sat there, completely still, staring at that line as if it were a blade slowly slicing through the last shred of trust one had for him. It wasn't that he wanted my assets. It was that he believed he was smarter than me. I uploaded a copy of the document into a separate secure storage account. Then I logged out, cleared the access history, and shut down the computer. Before leaving the room, I paused at the framed photo on his desk, our wedding picture. My gaze in that image seemed to be staring right at me now, as if I had always known. I left the room, taking nothing but silence with me. But in my mind, every detail was beginning to reorder itself. Sharpened, precise. I no longer questioned whether I was overreacting. Because now, I knew I had started just in time. And I also knew he had moved first, but never realized I'd already built the board he was playing on. Friday dinner at the Hampton estate was always held under an unspoken but rigid ritual. Cocktails at 6 o'clock, appetizers served at 6:30, main course plated before 7, and conversation limited to business, real estate, or people not present, because they were easier to talk about. That night, I arrived on time in a perfectly tailored long black dress, my hair in a neat bun, wearing no jewelry except my wedding ring. Just polished enough to avoid scrutiny, discreet enough not to draw attention too soon. Joanne sat at the head of the table as usual, white silk blouse with a high collar, her old pearl necklace gleaming, makeup applied so meticulously it looked airbrushed. Liam sat to my left, quiet, occasionally chiming in while his mother and cousin discussed expanding their spa branches in Houston. I nodded politely, smiled occasionally, but said nothing. I was waiting. The roast lamb had just been served, and the butler poured red wine into our glasses. Joanne raised her glass, her eyes sweeping the table like a queen surveying her court. "Sadie," she said sweetly, "have you still been working at your old office lately? I thought after the wedding, you might consider collaborating with Liam, get more involved in the family's affairs." I lifted my wine glass, gave it a gentle swirl, and replied slowly, almost casually, "Actually, I'm still working, but not at my old office. Hartwell Medical was officially acquired by the Hope Bridge Foundation. I'm now on the board." A fork clinked against a porcelain plate somewhere, then silence. Even the night breeze rustling through the window felt louder. Joanne looked at me. No blink. No smile. Just stared. Liam's cousin, Grace, leaned forward. "Hope Bridge Foundation? Aren't they the ones reviewing grant proposals for Hampton Health's expansion?" I nodded, eyes still locked on Joanne. "Yes. They're evaluating applicants for the next quarter. I'll be on the strategic review panel." Liam set down his wine glass a little too firmly. "Why didn't you ever mention this to me?" I smiled, still not looking away from Joanne. "I was only officially appointed last week. So far, it's still confidential within the foundation. But since tonight is just family, I thought there's no need to hide it." Joanne smiled slowly. A graceful smile, but just enough to cover the flicker of tension tightening at the corners of her eyes. She set her glass down, then turned to Liam. "Son, I need a quick word with you. About the hospital matter." Liam hesitated, glancing at me. I gave a soft nod. "Go ahead. I'll pour more tea." They both stood. Joanne walked toward the hallway first, Liam followed. I waited precisely 15 seconds, then quietly pulled my phone from my handbag, pressed record, and placed it on the velvet-lined chair behind the thick curtain by the entry, where I knew the acoustics captured every word from the hall. Footsteps stopped outside. "Tell me the truth." Joanne's voice was lower, sharper. "How long have you known Sadie's involved with Hope Bridge?" "Mom, I just found out tonight." "I swear." "Then she's been planning this all along. Don't you see? She's laying a trap. Starting with the joint account, refusing to sign those transfer documents. And now even the foundation we're relying on is falling under her influence." "Mom, don't exaggerate. It might just be coincidence." "Coincidence?" Joanne spat the word. "She's not the kind of woman who gets led around. I've seen how she sidesteps everything while making you think you're still in charge." Liam fell silent. "You'd better get her to sign over those assets before this quarter ends. Otherwise, this hospital will end up begging for funding from her." "Mom, I can't force her. She's already suspicious." "Then make her think it's your idea. For your future together. Step back. Bait her in. Do you hear me?" At that moment, I heard footsteps returning. I quickly grabbed my phone, stopped the recording, and slipped it into my purse like it had never left the table. When Liam came back, he avoided my eyes. Joanne smiled as if she'd just shared a fond memory with her son, then looked at me with an almost exaggerated warmth. Thank you, Sadie, for sharing that. I truly believe you'll do what's best for both families. I smiled back and replied gently, so do I, Mother. We all want to preserve what truly matters, don't we? I poured more wine into my glass. The subtle bitterness slid down my throat without resistance. But inside me, everything had shifted. No more gray areas. No more hesitation. From that moment on, I no longer thought of myself as preserving a marriage. I was executing a strategy. And the board had already begun to change. I arrived at my private attorney's office on a Monday morning. The sky was overcast but not cold. A breeze off the Ashley River caught the edge of my wool coat and lifted it slightly. The office sat on the 5th floor of an old stone-faced building. No flashy signage, no extra directories, just a frosted glass panel with engraved letters. Whitaker Barnes, Strategic Legal Counsel. I'd chosen this firm 4 years ago, after turning down 3 larger firms who'd asked too many questions about the origin of my assets. Whitaker hadn't. He just nodded and said, I don't need to know who left you those assets. I only need to know who holds them now. I was led into a quiet room with dark mahogany flooring, soft amber lighting reflecting off a pair of sunglasses resting on the table. Whitaker entered just a few minutes later, graying hair, a perfectly pressed suit. He sat across from me, set down his reading glasses beside a stack of pre-opened files, and tilted his head slightly as he spoke in his low voice. Sadie, what brings you in today? I pulled a slim folder from my bag and placed it gently on the table. No label. No markings. But inside was everything my grandfather had prepared for the situation I now faced. This file is called the Trigger Protocol, I said, opening it to reveal a bundle of cream-colored papers bound with a brass clip. At the top of the first page was a typed line, to be activated only upon clear evidence of postmarital asset manipulation. Whitaker picked it up, flipping through the pages slowly. I stayed silent, letting him absorb every word. I knew he needed to understand the details. This wasn't like any contract I had ever signed. It didn't fall under the jurisdiction of any family court. It was a private directive, issued by the Legacy Advisory Board my grandfather had established within the Haven Trust, activated only when I could present clear proof of a marriage built on false intentions. Eventually he looked up. His voice was unchanged, but something had shifted in his eyes. You realize if we submit this, the entire Haven asset system will be frozen immediately, even accounts that are currently generating returns? I nodded. And if they suspect abuse of authority, the board could temporarily revoke your asset representation for up to 3 months? I understand, I said slowly. But I'm not abusing anything. He said nothing. I opened my phone and played a carefully clipped audio file from Friday night. The conversation between Joanne and Liam just outside the dining room. Their pressure, their plan to manipulate me, and that phrase repeated again and again. She needs to sign before the quarter ends. I set the phone on the table and pressed play. The sound came through clearly, no distortion, no background noise. When it ended, Mr. Whitaker reached over to pause the speaker, leaned back in his chair and looked at me once more. It wasn't an assessment. It was confirmation. I'll handle it today, he said. We'll need your signature to activate the request. Then we'll send the scan to the coordination office in Wilmington. I'm ready, I said, pulling out another set of documents from my bag, this one sealed and labeled. Haven Legal Trigger 12B. I've also uploaded copies of the documents and audio files to a private cloud. Triple encrypted. If anything leaks, the data remains intact. He looked at me, this time with the faintest smile. Robert trained you well. I simply nodded. 2 hours later, I received the first confirmation from the Delaware coordination team. Request to activate TR-12 approved. All asset movements within the Haven system are now frozen and under neutral trustee control pending internal review. Effective immediately. I stared at the screen without expression. My heart didn't race. It didn't slow. I just felt a quietness settle in, like I had closed a door that made no sound, but new fire burned behind it. About 40 minutes later, I received an email from the bank. A request from Liam to alter control of the joint account, seeking to convert it into full management under Hampton Group Holdings. Request denied. Reason: Account linked to assets currently under legal restriction via the Haven system. All modifications require trustee coordination approval. I sat back in my chair, arms folded, eyes locked on my laptop screen. I didn't think. I didn't strategize. I simply let myself feel the difference between silence imposed and silence chosen. Because today, for the first time since stepping into the Hampton household, I didn't have to stay quiet to see what they would do next. Today I had spoken in the only language they truly listened to. Law. And ownership. I walked into the courtroom in shoes that made no sound and with the composure of someone who didn't need to win to be heard. Across the aisle, Liam sat in a dark navy suit, hair neatly combed, as if he'd never spent nights drafting plans to seize control of his new wife's fortune. Joanne sat behind him, gripping a white leather handbag so tightly her knuckles were visible. I didn't look at them long. Just once. Enough to confirm they were still performing their roles. I moved to the right side table where my attorney, Mr. Whitaker, stood beside a red-stamped file, Prenuptial Defense Plus Tier 12B Protocol. The judge entered, a man in his early 60s, deep-set eyes, back straight like a pillar. He gave a small nod and began. We're here to review a post-marital joint asset claim filed by the petitioner, Mr. Liam Hampton, against the respondent, Mrs. Sadie Hampton. I've read the file. Now we'll hear from the petitioner. Liam's attorney stood confident. Your Honor, my client believes that assets generated during the course of this marriage, specifically Haven shares, investment accounts, and property in Charleston, should be considered marital property. We contend that the prenup lacks clear provisions for shielding independent holdings and does not address third-party trust mechanisms. The judge did not nod. He turned to me. Mrs. Sadie, your response. Whitaker stood. His voice was steady, firm. Your Honor, all assets listed by the petitioner appear in Appendix B of the prenuptial agreement, with explicit notation. Assets under independent control of the second signatory, exempt from division in all postmarital disputes. Furthermore, the respondent has activated the trigger protocol in accordance with legal procedure, prior to any formal filing. The opposing lawyer interjected. We argue the prenup cannot extend to concealed trust structures. It creates inequity. Whitaker didn't flinch. And I argue no prenup can foresee calculated affection used as a tool to gain access to the other party's wealth. But we prepared for that. As the court has already reviewed, so does the audio recording. The judge raised a hand. Enough. He opened a file already marked. I've listened to the full audio. I've reviewed every line of the prenup, along with documentation from the Delaware Asset Management Office and the Haven Holdings Coordination Board. He looked up and stared directly at Liam. Mr. Hampton, I don't know if you ever truly loved Mrs. Sadie. But what I do know is this. You signed a legally binding contract. You were fully advised. And your attempt to alter the ownership structure after marriage is a clear indicator of financial manipulation, not a request for equitable sharing. Liam shifted uncomfortably. Joanne no longer clutched her purse. She stared at me, her eyes glistening with something that looked like resentment she hadn't yet found words for. The judge continued. Based on the terms of the separate property protection agreement and the evidence of attempted interference through shell companies like Civic Advisory, the court declares, all assets remain the sole independent property of Mrs. Sadie Hampton. No division, no negotiation, no reimbursement. Case closed. The sound of the gavel striking wasn't loud, but in my chest, it echoed like an earthquake finally settling. I didn't turn to look at Liam. But I could feel his gaze. Not angry, not hateful. Just stunned. Like someone who had mapped out every move but forgot that the board was never his to begin with. Joan was different. She stood up and slowly walked out of the gallery. But as she passed me, she paused. Her gaze had changed, no longer rigid, no longer proud. What remained was emptiness, exhaustion, the hollow ache of someone who had just brushed against an old wound long thought buried. That fortune, she rasped, her voice rough like something dragging across wood, it should have been mine years ago. He took it from me. Then gave it to you. I met her eyes. He didn't take anything from you. You lost it the moment you started seeing men as stepping stones. He chose me because I never looked at anyone as a ladder to power. Joanne didn't reply. She turned away. And in that moment, as she left the courtroom, I saw the once proud posture of her shoulders collapse inward. As if the weight of the past had returned, and this time no one was holding it up. I didn't plan to visit the nursing home. At least not so soon. But when I got the call from the head nurse at Magnolia Haven, saying Joanne had been moved to the special care unit after a mild stroke, I couldn't completely ignore it. The nurse's voice was gentle but tense. She's awake, but her speech is still slow. She needs someone familiar to help stabilize her emotionally. She asked for your name. The road to the facility ran along a still winter lake, the water smooth as glass, weeping willows bowing in the wind. The nursing home sat at the end of a hill, quiet like a house that didn't want to be remembered. I stepped inside, walking through deep blue carpeted hallways, where the scent of antiseptic mixed with dried lavender hung from windowsills. The space softened you and warned you at once. Joanne lay on her side in bed, eyes open, staring out the window. Her face still held sharpness, though the features had softened after the stroke. She wore a pale gray silk robe, her hair neatly tied, the same pearl necklace at her throat, the one she always wore as a reminder of a time when no one dared question her place in any room. I tapped lightly on the door. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were still foggy but showed no surprise when she saw me. "Sadie," she said, her voice weak but clear. I stepped in, pulled a chair close to her bed, not too close, not too far. Just enough to talk without touching unless absolutely necessary. "You asked why I came?" She tilted her head. "I didn't think you'd have the time. I came to ask one thing." I paused for a few seconds, not out of hesitation, but to signal that this was the last time I would ever need an answer from her. "Why did you hate me, even before you knew who I was?" She looked at me longer than I expected. In her eyes, the sharpness had faded, but the composure of someone used to commanding others with a single glance remained. "Because I knew you were someone I couldn't control." I nodded. Not surprised. Not hurt. "No," I said. "You didn't hate me because I couldn't be controlled. You hated me because you saw yourself in me." She frowned but didn't object. I went on. "Smart. Knew how to walk into places you weren't invited. Wanted to stand as an equal. But you chose money. You chose power. And I leaned back, locking eyes with her. "I chose freedom." She said nothing. But her lips trembled. I didn't know if it was emotion or the muscles still recovering from the stroke. But I knew she understood me. "I used to think you hated me because I was an outsider. Because I didn't carry the Hampton blood you guarded like a brand name. But that wasn't it." I reached into my bag and pulled out two small objects. One was a wedding ring, thin, plain gold, cold with the shine of metal that had seen too many lies. The other was an old photo, its edges frayed, paper yellowed with time. I placed them both on the small table beside her bed. The photo showed a charity gala, simple white fabric backdrop, faded lettering behind it. Whitlock Foundation, Give Hope Back. In the center was a younger Joanne, bright eyes, dark hair, her arm linked with Robert Whitlock's. Both were smiling. Not the stiff smiles of posed portraits back then, but something real, unguarded, gentle. She stared at the photo as if she couldn't believe it existed. Her hand trembled midair, reaching but never quite touching. "I found it in my grandfather's archives," I said evenly. "He never spoke of you. Not one word of blame. No explanation. Just kept this in the drawer where he stored things no one else wanted to remember, but he couldn't throw away." She closed her eyes, then opened them again. That was when I saw the true weariness in them. No more sharp edges, no remnants of power. Just a woman coming full circle, staring at the first choice she ever made. "I don't need your forgiveness. I don't expect your understanding," I said softly. "I just wanted you to know. I didn't choose your path. And I'm still standing." I stood up. Before I turned away, I looked at her one last time. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was still locked on the photo, as if trying to hear a memory long gone silent. I said nothing more. No goodbyes. I simply walked away, leaving behind a woman who once believed that with enough charm and calculation, life would bend to her will. But what she didn't count on was that some women aren't here to win the same way she did, but by refusing to be like anyone at all. I never went back to the Hampton estate. Not because I was afraid to face it, but because there was nothing left to face. The doors that closed after that trial weren't meant to end a chapter. They were meant to open a path. One for me and for those who were never given the right to choose. I moved to Savannah on an early March day, just as the azaleas lining the street began to bloom pale purple. The house I chose stood on the edge of the historic district, once an old bus depot abandoned for nearly 20 years. Weathered brick walls, sagging wooden windows, broken roof tiles. But the foundation was strong and inside the space was wide enough to hold what I envisioned. I called it Haven House. Not a random name and not just nostalgia for the old Haven protocol, but because I wanted it to be a refuge for women who had once been trapped in nameless contracts. Marriages that looked like love but were really strategy. The house was renovated in 6 weeks. The windows were replaced entirely, but I kept the old tiled floors, because I wanted every step the women took to land on ground that had once cracked, collapsed, and risen again. In the main room, I placed a round wooden table. No head, no hierarchy. Everyone sat as equals. On the wall, I hung a hand-carved wooden sign. Haven House, where silence is no longer a weakness. The first gathering had 6 women. One young woman had just finalized her divorce after discovering her husband had used her name to mortgage all of their assets. Another was a single mother being countersued by her ex-husband for financial betrayal, even though he was the one who took out the loan that bankrupted their family. There was also a middle-aged woman, nearly 50, who said she had never signed a single document, but when her husband passed away, she found that her name wasn't on any piece of land they had ever called ours. I didn't share my story right away. I just listened. I listened to voices still trembling, stories cut off mid-sentence by tears, fragments of life that each woman thought she'd endured alone. Then I pulled out a whiteboard and wrote one line across it. No one here needs to apologize for trusting. They looked at me, their eyes shifting. A young woman asked quietly, "So, if you've got nothing left, where do you even begin?" I pointed to the center of the table. With knowledge. With how to read a contract. With understanding the difference between love and a legal obligation. And with realizing this, you have the right to say no. Each week we held 2 sessions. One focused on basic legal literacy in marriage and personal finance. The other was open discussion. No lesson plans, no structure, just listening and connection. Slowly more people came. Some from neighboring towns. Some drove 3 hours just to sit, listen, and leave in silence. But the next week they came back. One late afternoon, as the sun began streaming diagonally through the office window, I sat alone. In front of me lay the old wedding ring, still gleaming, but cold like a relic that no longer needed explanation. Beside it was a sealed envelope, its paper yellowed with age. I opened it. Inside was the letter my grandfather had written when I turned 16, the day I officially became the guardian of the Haven Trust, a secret no one else knew. You don't need to fight them. You only need to let them fall, when there's nothing left to take. When your silence is no longer a weakness, but a mirror forcing them to see themselves. I folded the letter and placed it beside the ring, then looked out the window. The trees swayed gently in the wind, sunlight pouring golden over the worn wooden sill. No applause. No triumphant song. Just the quiet of someone who knows she doesn't need to win to prove anything. Because sometimes it's not that I won. It's that they lost on their own. And I simply chose not to fall with them. What do you think about this story? Have you ever stayed silent out of trust, only to realize that trust was used against you? Or have you seen someone walk away from an unjust life, not with rage but with grace and quiet strength? I believe every woman carries a unique kind of power, not to overpower others, but to protect herself from anything trying to devour the value she doesn't put on display. If Sadie's story made you reflect, if you saw yourself or someone you know in those details that felt distant yet familiar, please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, because behind every voice is a life searching for its own path. And don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss the next story. Journeys full of emotion, heartbreak, choices, and sometimes rebirth. Stories where people find themselves again in things they thought were long lost. Because sometimes, it's the family we're not born into that teaches us how to love ourselves the way we were always meant to.